This video contains spoilers for Deltarune Chapters 1 through 4. If you have not played them yet, I highly encourage you to do so before continuing. Deltarune and its predecessor, Undertale, have been very formative games in my life. I found out about both of them when I was in middle school, and they helped me get over some very negative views ahead at the time. Now with Chapters 3 and 4 out with Chapter 5 on the way, I wanted to talk about it. This isn't going to be any theory crafting or character analysis, I just wanted to go through the chapters and talk about the things that I find interesting that may or may not have been noticed. I do feel that it is important to mention before we get into it, due to the game only being halfway complete by the time of this video's recording, everything that I mention here is subject to change, because as we saw in Chapter 3, Toby Fox is not one to be predictable. Also, since certain things only apply to certain chapters while others are consistent throughout the entire game, I will be organizing this by chapter order first, and then continue to things that persist throughout the entire game thus far. Even though Chapter 1 is the shortest so far, doesn't mean that there isn't anything to talk about. I've played Chapter 1 a lot since I first found out about it, and I enjoyed it more than Undertale when I first played that, mostly due to how I hadn't been spoiled on it yet and there's so much yet to come. Lancer is probably my favorite character of the entire game. I recently had the thought that due to his lack of a walk cycle and the pose that he makes while moving, it reminded me of how someone would position themselves while wearing heelys. Those shoes that had the wheel and the heel of it. I usually see people lift their toes so that the wheel is the only thing touching the ground. Also, Lancer seems like the kind of kid to wear something like that because he thinks it's cool. The reason I think Lancer rides a bicycle, intentionally or not, is a 2-for-1 reference. Lancer, being the Jack of Spades, makes him a playing card in the light world, and the most well-known brand of playing cards is Bicycle. Also, Lancer's bike is set on fire to mimic the exhaust of a motorcycle. However, cards are often used on the spoke of a bike to mimic the sound of a motorcycle instead. Now usually, when designing the Thrash machine, if you try to design a decent one, Susie and Lancer will make it poorly and destroy it to fight you directly instead. However, by designing it to be the duck, they build it perfectly. Lancer even questions if you're evil because of how bad the design is. When starting Chapter 2 in a fresh save file, you'll be greeted with a wireframe queen head that laughs and explodes. This was easier to see in the initial demo of Deltarune Chapter 2 when it was a standalone program, and the integration of the complete game makes it harder to replicate. When I played this for the first time, you can imagine how blown away I was by this. Honestly, a great reintroduction to the game after 3 years, and it immediately hooked me. The 3D wireframe head of Queen is very reminiscent of the CX4 chip graphics used in Mega Man X2 for the game's intro, Chop Register in Magna Centipede stage, and Sigma's final form. It is also present in Mega Man X3, but I haven't played enough of that game to remember where it is used. I like Sweet Cap'n Cakes. I think they're pretty underrated and I wish they showed up more. But other than me thinking that they're cool, I like that since there's 3 of them and they usually talk right after each other, instead of having full-size text sprites, they instead have mini talk sprites and have a shared dialogue box. This feature was also given to Clover in Castletown so that you could tell which one of her 3 heads is talking. This is something I wish was added for Lenino and Elnina in Chapter 3, because sometimes I can't tell which one of them is talking. I know that their overworld sprites have talking animations, but if I'm looking at the text, I'm less likely to be looking at the overworld sprites, but that just might be a me thing. Right after the fight with Queen, when she starts monologuing to Noelle about the night, her talking sprite is noticeably absent and her talking sound is sped up slightly. Tennis similarly does this in the flashback in Chapter 3, although his talking sound is at a variable speed throughout the monologue itself. Something I noticed that a lot of people didn't and were then confused about when Chapter 3 was released was Lancer and Rule's card in TV World. However, if you check your inventory even after going to Castletown by the end of the chapter, Chris will still have the cards in their pocket, even though there is no visual cue that Lancer and Rule's card go back out with them. Similarly to the wireframe Queen head, when loading a save file from Chapter 3 from the Chapter Select, there is an intro animation that uses the same logo from Tenna's future presentation with his TV Time soundbite. Throughout Chapter 3, alongside Tenna's text graphics, there are sound effects that play. When he asks for the characters' names, it plays the Oke Desu Ka soundbite originally used in Earthbound when starting a new file. When mentioning Azrael, referring to him as Chris's brother, a small segment of his theme from Undertale plays. And when checking up on Toriel after the second board, a small segment of Fallen Down plays. After the first board, when Tennant interrupts the credit scroll to announce the second board, he says stop 3 times, but if you notice, the third stop is a picture of a blue stop sign. Now first I was a little confused as to why this was the case, but then I remembered Sansa's brother has a very special attack. After the main characters escape and the TV World employees start to quit, Tennant starts to become more frantic. As a result, his text graphics don't show up unless he's reusing a specific phrase, tying the use of his graphics to his mood. A little while after the release of Chapter 3, a lot of people were made aware of an interesting detail about the song Glowing Snow. As it turns out, it is a slowed-down version of the Ua So songs from Undertale. A slightly faster version of Glowing Snow is played when you don't push Rousey on the first board, where the connection between the two songs is more noticeable. After the opening hymn during church, Susie will start talking to Chris. However, if you look at the pews in front of them, you can see for a brief moment that Snowy and Monster Teen overhear her and look at each other in horror since they're both scared of her. During the hometown section of the chapter, if you walk over to the lake and interact with the benches, there's a bit of dialogue with Susie. I do find it funny that we've seen Susie eat nearly anything she comes across, along with all the stuff in her fridge in Castletown, but she draws the line at an old fire on the ground. While in Castletown, you can replay the minigames from Chapter 3. An interesting detail about replaying Raise Up Your Bat, Susie will try to do better at the song compared to her performance in Chapter 3. This is something that Susie herself mentions in Chapter 4 when discussing when she used to go to church in some places she used to live. She mentions that she would try to sing the hymns, but she didn't know how the songs were supposed to go and was told to stop because she was doing it wrong. Now while replaying the song, she knows how the song is supposed to go and tries to play it well. The song's volume adjustment and cat swing seemingly have the same drum, piano, and horn backing tracks that were originally in the unused sneaking music from Chapter 3, albeit without Lost Girl, which I see as a good thing as it is used more as a sad song in Chapter 3 rather than something involving Noel or December in the main story. In the library hallway after the old man's study, there is a faint light coming from the room from the stained glass windows, and if you look at them closely enough, you can see the shadow of the Deltarune symbol that is present on the window itself. In the second sanctuary, there is a fight with one of the old man's sets of armor that has begun to move on its own. While in the menu it is simply referred to as triple question mark, in the files it is referred to as the Sound of Justice. Now I think there are two reasons for this name. The in-universe version is that since the second sanctuary is Susie's dark world and her time with the old man was only as a darkener, her interpretation of the old man is limited. Rousey also mentions that darkeners based on specific people can only show up in certain dark worlds. This leaves Susie's idea of the old man as an echo of sorts, hence being named Sound of Justice. Another reason I think the name came about involves how people receive and interpret sound in the ear. There is a tiny bone in your ear called the malleus, and is one of the bones involved with hearing. Now, malleus is Latin for hammer, so the hammer of justice has a counterpart called the sound of justice, and the way people interpret sound involves a bone called the hammer. I would not have figured this out if I did not have Anatomy and Physiology 1 right after the release of chapters 3 and 4. When I was backtracking to find some other things to talk about, I found a philosopher and a wicker bell near the old man's study. Now most people probably just saw the philosopher when the wicker bell was completely stone, and noticed that the philosopher wasn't completely against the idea of the wicker bells running rampant. Now in the complete dark world with the third sanctuary open, the wicker bell tries to bring disaster upon them while the philosopher pretends to be worried about it. In both the first and second sanctuaries, there is a room where the philosophers are worshipping a stone statue of their ancestors, with there being a cycle of philosophers worshipping the organic and the organic worshipping the philosophers. The cycle is broken, however, once the third sanctuary unifies both dark worlds and now there is a stone statue, leaving the group of philosophers to ridicule the organic for ruining their worship while not realizing that it was who they were worshipping. When climbing the Titan at the end of the chapter, its stone shell starts to crumble away, revealing a texture using the image depths like other dark fountains. But when used on the Titan, there are faintly visible eyes within it. What you may not have realized, however, due to the frantic nature of the section, is that the eyes are animated to follow Chris as they climb the tower. When playing on the console version of the game with the dynamic borders on during the Titan fight, the eyes in the border will flash red for a moment when the Titan is attacked. When going back to Castletown after the chapter is finished and replaying the rhythm game, since neither Susie nor Rousey are present, their sections will play a demo. These demos seemingly don't miss notes, and by the end of the combo for Susie's demo, it says big combo, as opposed to giving the number of consistent notes. There is one more thing I want to mention that is persistent throughout the entire game. If you compare the color palettes of the Light World monsters to how they look in the Dark World, you can notice that they are slightly more saturated in the Dark World. This applies to Susie, Noelle, Birdly, and Undyne. It's as if they're under a black light. Toriel and Chris aren't affected by this because Chris is blue in the Dark World and Toriel's fur is white, so there's not much to be changed. I do want to mention before I wrap this up, I did go back and beat the secret bosses on my own time, and the proof should be on screen right now. I wasn't sure if I could, and that's why I didn't record it for the gameplay footage. Some were easier than others, and the net took me a couple days to beat. I hope you all enjoyed this. I really do love Deltarune, and it's a great game that I've been hooked on ever since it came out. I waited patiently for chapters 3 and 4, and I'll do so again for chapter 5. Until next time, have a great day.
to meet you.
Actually, we've met once before.
What?